Okay, I think we are live. Assalamualaikum everyone. Hope you're doing well. We are back once again with another amazing set of episodes for you for Muslim women in science and technology. So I am again, as usual, very excited for this episode as well. We have a very interesting topic that we will be discussing and venturing into today. Personally, I didn't know much about. What exactly is computational linguistics, and so we will find more about that today. So we're just going to wait a little longer so that more of you can join us in and we can have an amazing session. All right, so if you guys have not already watched our previous episodes for Muslim Women in Science and Technology, then you guys are definitely missing out on a lot because those two episodes are amazing, especially if you guys are interested in regenerative medicines and learning about what atomic astrophysics does. So these are certain things that we've talked about in a previous episode. So you guys should definitely check out our Facebook page as well as our YouTube channel if you guys are interested in those things. And one more thing that we're trying to do here with these webinar series is to encourage you as well as to explore different areas within science, different fields that you guys can actually explore and find your interest in. And that is why today's episode is very special because it's very different from the topic that we usually know. And we will know more about it. I'm just honestly stalling right now so that more of you can join us in. And I don't actually have much because I am really like really excited to actually begin the session and get to know more about this interesting field today. So hurry on up, join us so that I can actually begin by 9 p.m. Just a few more minutes so that more of you can join us in, and then we will begin. Just 2 more minutes to be exact. I don't know if you guys can tell, but I'm really excited. I am always very excited when it comes to these sessions, and so yeah, I'm very excited to learn about today's amazing session. And don't worry, we actually have in this month as well. We have today's episode, and we have another episode for you next week. If you guys have any guesses of who the next amazing woman in science is going to be, so you can leave a comment for us so that we can enjoy to see what sort of understanding do you have right now about our webinar series. So guess away who we're going to have for you next week. So yeah, all right, just 1 more minute and then we're going to start. All right, so it's 9 p.m. and we're going to start. Yeah, I think there is a bit of an issue with my internet connection. I'm sorry about that, but I think that sort of happens when you are in Pakistan and sometimes, the internet does not work. So apologies in advance. And so we're going to start. So assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to another amazing episode in Muslim Women in Science and Technology Stories from Around the World. My name is Nimra Khuram, and I am again very, very, very excited to bring you episode number 3. So, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, let me tell you a bit about what this webinar series is all about. So, this series is basically a celebration and a tribute to all those brilliant and talented Muslim women in STEM. So, we will be getting to know more about their work, their research, as well as what were some of the struggles they had to face, their inspirations and motivations to get them to where they are today. So, this is a bit about the series. So, our today's episode, which is titled Computational Linguistics, Machines and Language, is a very interesting topic in which we will be exploring what is computational linguistics, who are computational linguists, and why is it so exciting to be one. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce my guest speaker for tonight. Um, this super talented lady is a computational linguistic and actually computational linguist and a professor at the Department of Computer Science at George Washington University. She received her bachelor's in computer science from the American University in Cairo, as well as a bachelor's in tourist guidance with majors in archaeology and Egyptology. She has a master's in artificial intelligence and machine learning from George Washington University. She received her PhD in computational linguistics from University of Maryland and her postdoc in natural language processing from Stanford University. She's currently a research scientist at Facebook AI and also held a position as a principal applied scientist at Amazon. This superwoman has many media mentions and honors, including being selected as one of the top 150 leaders and visionaries in AI nationwide to participate in White House AI Summit. She has also featured in Teen Vogue magazine as well as Elle. This incredibly versatile lady is also the founder and director of the GWNLP lab called Care for Land. I present to you Dr. Mona Diab.
It's really an honor and a privilege to be invited to this forum. There's a bit of an echo. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
How are you doing?
Very well, thanks. Thanks a lot for the lovely introduction, and thanks a lot for the beautiful invitation. And as I said, as I was saying, it's really a privilege and an honor to be addressing your audience, especially in Pakistan these days. I'm hailing in from the West Coast in the United States. And I'm going to talk to you today about diversity in natural language processing or computational linguistics, some of my stories and some of my insights. What Nimra had already done, she introduced me in terms of background, in terms of research areas. So I'm going to jump right in. So what is natural language processing or computational linguistics? It's really the field of making computers process natural language. Processing natural language input and producing useful information that could be natural language output or some kind of structured data. It's basically software that could recognize, analyze, and generate text and speech. Does processing entail understanding? Maybe we're trying to mimic that, fake it till you make it kind of idea. So just to make sure that we're on the same page, what is a natural language? It refers to language that's spoken by people like English, Japanese, Swahili, Urdu, as opposed to programming languages such as C#, Java, Python, etc. So what is natural language processing again? NLP, or natural language processing, refers to the processing of specifically unstructured data, text in free form, basically unstructured text. So just to give you a sense of a contrast, I typically learn this way, contrast to structured data such as information in tables. So when you have information in tables, you have it in a way that you could query in an easy manner to figure out information. So what is semi-structured data? Actually, in almost no data is really truly unstructured. For example, this slide has distinctly identified zones, such as the title zone, the bullet zone, but essentially it facilitates search once you have that processed to identify that the word data occurred in the title and the word search occurred in the bullets. And I'm not addressing here the notion of linguistic structure. But essentially, what we want to do as part of this enterprise is go from languages in an unstructured form to structured data, so that we could actually, think and query over the structured data in interesting ways. The majority of data that's out there is in fact unstructured and semi-structured, to be specific. So there is a huge amount of data that's out there that we could tap into to get information. So why is natural language processing important? Take a look at this slide for a second. Can you read this? Yeah, you? Probably not, right? So what computers do is that they do know how to process information, but they actually lack knowledge. So computers see the text in English and Arabic and Urdu the same way you just saw the previous slide. People have no trouble understanding language because we have common sense knowledge, we have reasoning capacity, we have experience. However, computers have no common sense knowledge, they have no reasoning capacity unless we teach them. And that's the crux of the enterprise I work in. So why should you care? There's an enormous amount of knowledge that's out there currently that's available in machine readable form, which is basically natural language text. Think about also conversational agents, things like Alexa, Google Assistant. They are becoming more and more important forms of human to computer communication. Much of human to human communication is now mediated by computers, actually. And there's a whole myriad of very cool stuff and with lots of commercial interest. So some of the current real world applications, you can think about search, like very large bodies of text. Think about Google search. Think about question answering. There's a very famous question answering system that won what's called the Watson Jeopardy game several years back, 2011. Answering questions like who did what to whom where. Translation, translating between languages from one language to another. Think about Google Translate. Summarization, summarizing large amounts of text or speech so that you can get a synopsis of what's happening, what's trending and what's not in the news, voicemail, your email and so on. Sentiment, so can we gauge how people think about restaurants, about movies and so on. Dialogue systems, so think about interacting with your navigator on your car. This is typically, if you do this with voice, it's done through a dialogue system. Systems where you make reservations for planes, for travel, and so on. Even more, so notion of speech processing, common sense knowledge, text categorization, what we call web monitoring, etc. So I'm going to delve a tad bit deeper into this. So think about question answering. Question answering was sort of put on a pedestal back in 2011. There was a system that was developed by IBM Watson, and it beat humans at this Jeopardy game, where given a snippet of information, you're supposed to respond with a question. And it was able to beat world champions who have been practicing in this game forever. And it was able to do that using artificial intelligence. Sentiment analysis is basically, you can think about Amazon reviews. You go in and you put number of stars, you put in a smiley face, you put in an angry face. That indicates how you feel about the product or how you feel about the article. And it reflects people's opinions, emotions, feelings about the service or the thing at stake. So just to give you a sense here for sentiment analysis, if you have a movie review and user 1 and user 2 are talking, what do you think user 1 and user 2 sentiments toward this movie look like? So The Matrix rocked, I simply loved it. User 2 responds, really? That Keanu Reeves gets on my nerves. He's too robotic. So looking at this interaction, we could tag user 1 as somebody who's positive toward that specific movie, while user 2 is negative. So this is what sentiment analysis is about. We also care about this field for doing what we call blog analytics. So we do data mining of blogs, discussion fora, message boards, and so on. And basically, you can use that to do product marketing information, political opinion tracking, social network analysis, buzz analysis, what's hot and what's not, what is trending right now, for example. Information retrieval. This is a very successful enterprise. Just judged by the word Google, just you Google anything, meaning it's turned from a noun into a verb. This is what we do literally on our daily, in our daily lives. We use Google to search for information, products, services, and so on. The general model around information retrieval is that you're given a huge collection of texts, document collections, and so on, and you're given a query, typically the task is to find specific documents that are relevant to this given query. And how is that typically done? You create an index, like an index in a book, and look up information. Predominantly approaches that rely on vector-space models are the ones that are very famous and very much used, pervasive actually in the field. A special case of information retrieval is question answering, which essentially goes beyond word matching into taking into consideration question semantics, such as who did what to whom, where, when, and why. Another very famous application is machine translation. There are several types of machine translation: text-to-text machine translation, speech-to-speech machine translation, and the majority of these approaches work really, really well for what we call rich language pairs with lots of automated resources. So think about English, German, Spanish, English, French, Spanish, but think about languages that have lower resources like Swahili. They tend to have less automated resources, thereby less machine translation quality systems. And the current approaches rely on statistics, essentially, and that's why our field is called statistical natural language processing, where we try to learn from existing translations, what we call parallel data collections. Think about the Bible or the Quran as being translated very meticulously. We use that to be able to figure out what the word correspondences are, and therefore what meaning correspondences is, and accordingly we basically build machine translation systems. And we see very reasonable performance due to significant funding, especially with Google Translate, for example. Text summarization is essentially where you have lots of data and lots of documents, and you want to summarize them in a coherent way. So especially where you think about it, where you don't have a lot of time, say you're the CEO of a company, or you're even a doctor, a physician, and there are lots of articles that are being published every single day around your field, but you don't have the time or the bandwidth to spend reading every single bit of it. So summarization comes in very handy, where it tells you, gives you a synopsis of what's happening. It also gives you some keywords, for example, and it tells you what the sources are, what's the provenance of this information. So that's text summarization for you. Information extraction is another application where we given a document, and the idea is to find what's relevant in that document, in this unstructured data set, like where you have text in flow, and you're trying to identify what is this about. Is it about an industry? Is it about a position? Is it about a location? And it extracts this information for you and puts it into a knowledge base or a database where you can reason over and create queries in an expedited fashion. And finally, dialogue systems, as I just mentioned, is something like this, where a user interacts with the system. So we have this example here: can you book me a train from New York City to Washington? And the system comes back with, is your destination Washington State? And the user says, no, I mean Washington, D.C. The system goes, okay, when would you like to travel? And this is actually a system that's being used in the United States by Amtrak. It's called the Julie system. So I don't know whether you have something like this in Pakistan, but a lot of these systems are deployed all over the world, especially when it comes to reservations and travel and so on. So who uses NLP, or natural language processing, or computational linguistics? These are sort of like ISO, these are like terms that we use interchangeably. Big tech companies, for sure: Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Apple, and so on. And essentially, all of this relies on identifying language and identifying how language works. So language, to give you an idea, has different levels of processing associated with it. It has a notion of sounds, which is basically what we refer to as phonetics. It has classified sounds, which is referred to as phonology. It has words and forms, which is morphology. It has sentences and clauses, which is called syntax. And it has meaning, which is semantics, and language use, which is typically we refer to as pragmatics. And people typically go bottom up in the way they approach linguistic analysis. And each one of these has its own level of representation on the input and the output. And typically an output from one level is the input to the next level. Sometimes level might be skipped, merged, or split. So why is NLP hard? Let me just give you a sense and a taste for this. Think about these headlines. Something went wrong in jet crash, expert says, and so on. Think about these two highlighted red ones. Iraqi head seeks arms. as humans, we understand what this means, but you can have all kinds of interpretations associated with it. Like Iraqi head, as in like a human head seeking arms. That sounds like a bizarre thing, right? Um, but essentially, we notice that this is all very ambiguous. And ambiguity actually is pervasive across all 6 levels of linguistic knowledge that I had just mentioned. And it results from the existence of multiple possibilities for each of these levels. So just to give you, to hone in the point, here's an example. I made her duck. Could be I cooked waterfowl for her. I cooked the waterfowl that belongs to her. I created the ceramic duck she owns, or I caused her to quickly lower her head. But why is NLP also difficult? It's because think about the, as I mentioned, online data. There's non-standard usage of language, actually non-standard use of English in this specific example. Great job, Justin Bieber. We're so proud of what you've accomplished. So you can see here there are all kinds of strange ways of spelling, capitalization, sometimes even typos, shorthand for you, for example. Segmentation issues, not knowing where the word boundaries are. We have idioms, so getting cold feet, for example, that are, it's not really about getting cold feet. It's really about, shying away from doing something last minute. Neologisms, so we have the word like retweet, bromance, world knowledge, tricky entity names. So where is A Bug's Life playing? That's really a strange way of expressing things. So how do we approach this challenge? We typically divide and conquer. So we break the problem into smaller problems, throw state-of-the-art techniques at the smaller problems, and then we keep our fingers crossed. So natural language processing is a computer science discipline, and it falls right under artificial intelligence. And it's sort of like a sister to robotics and search and computer vision and so on. So under natural language processing, we have information retrieval, machine translation, language analysis, semantics, and parsing. So what's in our toolkit? So we have to have some knowledge of linguistics, and natural language processing, people call it features. We have state machines, we have formal rules, we have logic, we have probability theory, we have machine learning tools, but crucially, as a science, we have performance metrics. So we have well-defined evaluation metrics for different tasks. And typically the algorithms that people follow in this discipline could be rule-based, where we look at symbolic approaches, finite state automata, for example, but we also have probabilistic statistical ones, where we have learned from observation of labeled data, predicting new data based on old data that we've observed. And really the current trend has been in the area of machine learning. That's why computational linguistics or natural language processing is really at the intersection of machine learning and linguistics. So, and then we have 2 major paradigms around machine learning. We have traditional classical machine learning, which is typically feature engineering based, and deep learning approaches. So I just wanted to give you a highlight of what machine learning is. In machine learning, we have supervised learning, we have unsupervised learning, and we have reinforcement learning. And each one of these sprawls out into other smaller areas, like clustering, for example, in the case of unsupervised learning. In the case of supervised learning, we have regression and classification. So this is some of the buzzwords that we use. Just to give you another perspective, artificial intelligence in general has embedded in it machine learning. And within machine learning, we have neural networks. And within neural networks, we have deep learning. That's the current trend that we're using. And deep learning is really inspired by the brain architecture. So you can think about it as you have a nucleus, and it has some activation that happens in it, which is what we refer to as the bias. It takes some input and produces some output. So this is the inspiration. It's not intended to, to be the brain or to build a brain, but in essence, it's trying to mimic the behavior of the brain. And we call networks that we build in this paradigm neural networks. So there are simple ones where you have an input layer and an output layer, and we have a hidden layer in the middle. And in deep learning, just expand the number of layers. So it ends up being multiple layers internally as opposed to a single layer. So traditional machine learning versus deep learning. In traditional machine learning, we typically do what's called feature engineering, and it could be appropriate for smaller labeled data sets, more or less interpretable. Like we can understand, why did the machine arrive at a certain conclusion? As opposed to deep learning, where it's really, you don't have to hand engineer any features. We rely on feature representation. And it's very data hungry. You need a lot of data. And it has a huge parameter space. It has a huge number of parameters that control the system or control the models. Typically, it results in black box or almost very dark gray boxes in terms of solutions. So in terms of opaqueness, transparency, figuring out why did the machine arrive at a certain conclusion is not necessarily that amenable. And it has significant carbon footprint, but it yields superior performance to what we see in traditional machine learning. So just to give you a sense, all like the number of parameters that we end up seeing are in the billions of parameters. And this is not atypical. This is actually the case currently in our field. So working on models where we try to make it more efficient is a very hot area in this day and age, especially for the carbon footprint aspect. So just to give you a sense, for a problem like identifying, like in the information extraction problem, we're trying to identify locations, people's names, and so on. In the early 2000s, we were at a performance level of around 88%. Now we're at a performance level around 94%, thanks to these very sophisticated models that have billions of parameters. Another paradigm that we have that's very popular now in natural language processing is what's called transfer learning. And the idea is that in traditional machine learning, you build a task for label data for a task, and you build a learning system. And each task is independent of each other. In the current paradigm of transfer learning, we actually go from learning from multiple source tasks, try to extract some common patterns, and use those patterns to help us with a third task, with a target task. And this is very, very popular now. And we actually have a very big sort of upheaval in our field. And it's related to this whole paradigm of transfer learning, where we train very large language models, what's called language model representing world information. And we use that and extract patterns for it and sort of zone in or hone in on a smaller problem that we're trying to address. And the big representative of this case is called BERT. And BERT, what I typically call is BERT and its ilk, essentially. So where are we now in terms of language technology? What is the status today? So problems like spam detection, identifying the parts of speech of a sentence, like knowing where an adjective is, where a noun is, where a verb is, problems like name entity recognition, a person's name, an organization's name, a location's name, are mostly solved, especially for high resource languages where you have a lot of resources, a lot of labeled data, where like English, French, German. But think about languages like Urdu, it's still a very big challenge. We're also making very good progress on sentiment analysis, like this classification problem of figuring out when somebody's happy, when somebody's upset. Co-reference resolution, identifying that he is referring to some person's name, a male's name that occurred in the sequence. Word sense disambiguation, where we try to identify the sense of a word. So I need new batteries for my mouse, or the word mouse is definitely not going to be the animal. Parsing, identifying who did what to whom. Machine translation, information extraction, but still very hard is question answering. So we know how to do what's called factoid question answering. Like, Barack Obama was the president of the United States in 2008. This is a piece of information that could be extracted as a factoid from Wikipedia, for example. But answering questions like why and how is still very challenging. Paraphrase detection is still also very challenging, identifying that two sentences are equivalent. Summarization is very, very challenging, and dialogue systems is still very challenging. So this is kind of like the technical part of my talk. I'm going to tell you now more about me in this field. So NLP to me. So really, it's about diversity. So going beyond acknowledging, tolerating, and accepting to embracing and celebrating our human diversity, and using NLP as a vehicle towards that. So when I say diversity, I mean that on all forms, including research focus. And essentially, the general view nowadays, if you're not doing natural language processing using neural networks or reinforcement learning, then you're not cool. But we all want to be loved, right? So what about data, resource building, application, symbolic AI, or as I call it, pure honest-to-God linguistics in all its glory? So they all contribute to the science of computational linguistics. So basically, my first insight is not to let fads and trends dictate our attitudes towards one another and keep an open mind. So, why am I sharing this today? So, I want to share my perspective as a Muslim, as an African Middle Eastern, and also an Egyptian American Arab citizen. And by definition, inherently, I actually grew up in England. I'm multilingual, I'm multicultural, and I actually happen to be a woman in NLP, AI, and technology. So this is quite relevant to this series as well. So why natural language processing for me? I believe in it as a democratization of knowledge through language. So, and essentially, we're trying to empower humans to gain global information access in all languages. And by that, we're building bridges across cultures, recognizing what is shared and what makes us unique. And at the same time, trying to build cool technologies that may improve our lives. Think about Alexa, or Just Because. Actually, I just said Alexa, and she lit up in my room. But most interesting to me is maybe a better understanding of the human mind. World peace, maybe, yeah. So AI technology, the current picture, more or less, unfortunately, it's women are still in the sidelines. What we want to be, where we want to be, where we aspire to be, is have this diversity in representation and at the table, basically. So what does it take? It takes grit and perseverance. It takes resilience, learning and bouncing back from our failures. It takes empathy and collaboration, and I cannot emphasize that enough. Respect of our differences, support for each other, women and men, and standing up for what is right. See something, say something. Who am I to share my insights after all? I acknowledge I'm privileged with family who supported my ideas of a career, more or less. Fantastic mentors who are extremely, extremely important in my life. Amazing women and men role models. And contrary to stereotypes, girls and women pursuing STEM studies in the Arab and Muslim world make up something around anywhere between 37 to 54% of their student population. So this is something that people don't realize when they think about the Muslim world or the Arab world. And it's really shocking that this is it goes by unnoticed. So mentioning that, did I face adversity? Absolutely, you bet. So let me tell you my story. I spoke at 7 months, probably had a lot to say. I was very determined, very stubborn, quite passionate, and a little anarchistic. You can ask my mother about a blue dress with an orange stockings that I insisted on wearing on my 4th birthday. I grew up a bilingual, native bilingual speaker of English and Arabic, as I mentioned. I grew up in England. At around 10 years old, I seriously had a multilingual conundrum. The bottom line is, we were eating pasta, and I asked my parents, how come our trees in Egypt grow Latin alphabet pasta, not Arabic alphabet? And I was questioning whether these were the remnants of the British occupation of the country back in the, in the early 20th century. My parents were kind of like, whoa, pasta trees? Okay, what are you saying? So still at the age of 10, maybe that was like an age of epiphanies, I also discovered the power of language through the Quran. And as most of this audience probably knows, Islam is a religion that is truly language centric. And I developed a really strong passion for reading. Fast forward 6 years, I decided to double major in mathematics and comparative literature in college. But of course, my parents were like, whoa, you won't make a living, let alone find a good husband. I don't know how it is in Pakistan, but definitely in Egypt, that's the perception. So long story short, I ended up doing an undergraduate double major, Egyptology and computer science. So the way they convinced me was that, computer science is really math after all. My father was a professor of aeronautical engineering, so he was like very good at conviction and at convincing and persuading. And he's like, computer science, mathematics, they're kind of the same thing. But I also minored in philosophy and psychology. I fell in love with AI, and I actually insisted on an unorthodox graduation project, which was really my passionate proposal. I built an expert system for completion of missing parts from hieroglyphic text, and the idea was to leverage a model expert's knowledge. My initial foray into natural language processing, but even at that point in time, I did not know it was called that. And I didn't know how to proceed because I didn't have role models in this specific field when I was studying my undergraduate in Egypt. So I came to the US and I was all but defense in computer science and specifically computer vision, where I actually worked on reinforcement learning. And essentially, I ended up dropping the PhD in computer science in pursuit of a computational linguistics degree. And what instigated it was really a remark by one of my professors, who was my advisor at the time. And he said, just if you want to work on language, just work on language. You speak English, don't you? And I figured there must be more to it than just speaking the language. And I was not mistaken. I actually ended up earning a PhD in computational linguistics at University of Maryland from a linguistics department. And of course, my parents threw up their hands and they were like, I'm never going to get a job. Well, let me say, I actually got lots of good jobs. So I proved them wrong. But essentially, I wanted to talk a little bit about the initial challenges I faced moving from Egypt to the United States. So there were some positive cultural clashes that I had with my PhD advisor, Philip Resnick, who's somebody who's very famous in our field. There was the initial pragmatic connotation of inshallah, God willing. Everybody in this audience probably knows inshallah, in Egyptian versus American culture. And he was like, whoa, when you say inshallah, does this mean you're actually going to get something done? He would give me an assignment and I'd be like, inshallah, I'll get it done. And he'd be like, wait a second, what is this inshallah thing? And I said, well, it means God willing. And he's like, wait a second, does that mean you're actually going to say that you're going to get it done or not? And I would say, yes, of course I'll get it done. But, God willing, if I don't get into an accident, then of course I'll get it done. So outcome, Philip now actually uses the expression along with mashallah in our conversations, and we have regular conversations. So it's a really, really nice outcome. But there were also negative cultural clashes that I went through. Upon invitation to a lab celebration of Ramadan, a lab mate who I thought was a friend was telling me straight to my face that my very existence bothered him. The outcome was that guys in my lab took turns escorting me to and from the lab for a while till he actually quit the program altogether. So it was a very challenging time. I also made some unorthodox career choices. After I finished my postdoc at Stanford, I got all kinds of offers you can imagine for what's called tenure track positions, like university positions, to be a professor in a university. And I decided not to accept any of these, and as well as lucrative industrial offers, I decided to go for what's called a soft money position, where I become a research scientist or research professor. And I was there for 8 years at Columbia University. And I believe that was, a very unorthodox career choice. Actually, it was a very unorthodox career choice given the options that I had. And of course, my advisors were like, why, what, huh, why, okay, whatever. And my idea was that I had a specific passion, my passion and my vision. My passion was to build multilingual resources and technologies. Did you ever realize that the majority of data sets are still very Anglo-centric? Think about medical images, videos, not just languages, due to less representation for the digitally disenfranchised. And my vision was to move away from this English-centric world of natural language processing, AI, to create less bias, basically affording equitable access to knowledge and information to all peoples, really democratization of technology. And also, a third dimension was the calculated risk and the timing. My idea was to take on the Arabic dialect challenge, which is essentially a microcosm of natural language processing challenges, covering the spectrum from low resource scenarios to complex linguistic modeling. And I was extremely blessed. I had excellent collaborators. I found a fantastic team that I loved working with at Columbia that really helped build my views and my ideas and my dreams. So it was really an icing on the cake. So what is my research focus? One of my research foci is multilinguality and cross-lingual transfer. And the idea is that it serves the desiderata that in a world of global communication, we want to make sure that we have universal solutions, generalized solutions that have a local flavor. But we also have a need for processing all kinds of languages to address all these applications that I mentioned earlier. So our idea here is to cater to these customers in their native language while affording them access to available information in other languages. So what am I working on today? I'm working on trying to leverage machine translation to automatically translate scientific content to languages of the world. And I'm starting to look at Hindi, Urdu, Arabic, French, Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, and so on. I'm looking at also cross-lingual nuanced emotion detection. I'm looking at ways of making our models more efficient. I'm looking at misinformation propagation. I'm looking at the why and how questions. And I'm looking also at schizophrenia and PTSD, like mental health support systems. What did I learn over the years? So it seems like evidence suggests that there is some core semantic space that exists across languages, some form of what we call interlingua, but with a modern twist. And the space is yet to be discovered, and I believe it should be discovered in a hybrid manner. So we need to build the data-driven, sophisticated models, but we also need to incorporate explicit linguistic knowledge for both feature engineering and representation, and especially helping with low resource scenarios, which could lead to more interpretable models. So it's not just sufficient to build models that are black boxes or even gray boxes. We need white boxes where we can actually understand why did a machine arrive at that conclusion, especially when it comes to critical systems. Say you're trying to support doctors and physicians in critical situations, which protocol to take up with say cancer treatment. That is critical information. So you want to make sure that there's traceability, that they have visibility into why did the machine arrive at a specific conclusion. But essentially, knowing your data is crucial, and I believe that good error and success analysis are key to good science. So despite a lot of my successes, I happen to co-establish one of the strongest recognized reference points in Arabic natural language processing in the world. I also co-established 2 research trends in computational linguistics, garnered over $28 million in research funds. I served as a Columbia University faculty senator for several years. I co-established a major conference, and I published over 200 papers in our field. But I also faced adversity reflecting specific common perceptions. I was told when I was still in a soft money position, I'm currently tenured as a full professor in computer science at George Washington University in the US. But at that point in time, I was still in a soft money position as a research professor. Literally, I was told, if you're that good, how come you're not in a tenured position already? Because there's a perception that tenured positions are much better, or they value people more than non-tenured positions. And in a job interview for an academic position, the VP of research for that specific university told me, you realize you made suboptimal career choices in your life, and therefore we could question your ability to make rational decisions joining our faculty. And my response was, doesn't that depend on your objective function and what you're optimizing for? Potentially. So my story to date, I've just come out recently, like 4 or 5 years ago, as a Muslim woman scientist. I was never really closeted. I mean, I would tell people in conferences that I don't kiss, I don't hug, I don't drink, but now it's more visible. As you can see, I'm wearing the hijab. And the motivations for me essentially were first and foremost my personal faith, but also I wanted to shatter some stereotypes in an era where Islamophobia and common xenophobia is rampant. And there's a saying that I really love, if not me, who? If not now, then when? And hopefully I would serve as a positive role model for young Muslims and non-Muslims alike. So challenging adversity, right after I came out as as obviously a Muslim, I was attacked for my public political views about my home country, Egypt, by a member of our NLP community. But I learned that there are hundreds of amazing supportive people among us in our scientific community. They're remaining positive and adopting a growth mindset while avoiding the victim narrative helps. Sometimes we need to convince people that they actually do have power to change perceptions. They just need to assume. And being assertive, proactive, and constructive in establishing mechanisms to stop and hold those bullies accountable for their aggressive behavior goes a long way, but it requires patience and perseverance. So my second big insight, in a nutshell, we become empowered when we adopt a growth mindset over a fixed one, never too late. So I'm always being an eternal student and trying to learn from my experiences. And crucially, we discard the victim mentality. So do not, even if you've been bullied, don't adopt a victim mentality, adopt a growth mindset. What is my take-home message? Pursue your dreams with grit, resilience, be empathetic, be yourself, no need to conform to a certain mold, take calculated risks, avoid fads and trend attitude pitfalls, always be respectful of others' passions and career choices. They probably have a reason, as I hope I've illustrated here. And recognize that we also share more than what meets an eye as humans. And finally, collaborate, 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 collaborate. It typically takes a team. So remember, we're stronger because of our diversity, not in spite of it, and we're stronger together. And I'd like to close off with acknowledgements. My research has been funded and supported by lots of these great organizations in the United States, from Google Faculty Awards to National Science Foundation, to Qatar National Foundation and DARPA, which is the Army's research funds. And I'd like to close off with a note of gratitude to my mentors, Leila Badawi, Ahmed Rafa, Peter Bock, Philip Resnick, Dan Jarowski, Chris Manning, David Waltz, Bonnie Dorr, Martha Palmer, Kathy McLuhan, Julie Hirschberg, and Owen Rambo. I was very, very lucky to have them in my life, and they're still my mentors. And to my collaborators, who are very, very numerous, many, many of them that I cannot list here. But basically, more importantly, is to my students, for teaching me to be patient and allowing me to really tap into their ever-growing creativity and curiosity. Thank you very much, and I think I'm ready now for questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that amazing presentation. I actually have no words except for that's all I have. That's the only emotion I can do right now.
Thank you.
Because I honestly have no words. It was such an amazing presentation. Oh my
Thank
God.
you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, you're you're embarrassing again. Well, thank you so much.
No, it's true. Actually, I want to point out one thing is that when you mentioned the term inshallah that you use for, with your
Professor?
advisor, I think this is some sort of trend here as well. Yeah, with your professor, that's sort of a trend here as well, because when people say inshallah here, mostly they ask us, are you going to actually do this thing or not? Because, it sort of has become sort of like a taboo that if you say inshallah, that means you're not going to end up doing that task.
Yeah, we have this thing in Egypt, by the way.
All right, so I'm going to take some questions now. Most of it, I think you've presented it so well that no one has any question, except I have a friend. She has privately messaged me on my phone. She's like, please ask Dr. Mona these questions. So I'm going to ask you those questions.
Sure.
Okay, so she's asking you, where does technology lie as of now in terms of improving the proficiency of bots? Do you see a future where we won't come across, let's say, funny Google translations of Urdu? Perhaps a time where robots could actually replace language teachers?
So actually, I worked at Amazon for 2 years, leading the team on dialogue systems and specifically bots, but for enterprises. So and it's a very, very challenging field. It's actually a fascinating field because it's really it's a synthesis of a lot of technologies. And now, if I'm to project, we're getting there. So we're building more and more human-like chatbots that are, able to engage. But the problem with a lot of the systems that we're building out there is that they reflect also the biases in the data that they're learning from. So, and they're easily sort of gamed into making, bias, racist remarks very quickly because they learn from the data that they're built on top of. So it's this challenge of trying to find that sweet spot where you actually have chatbots that could be useful. You can think about Alexa and Google Assistant as, okay, Alexa, no, not.
The noun assistant is usually defined as a person who assists or gives aid and support, helper. The adjective assistant
Alexa,
is usually
stop.
defined as assisting, helpful.
Okay. So you've it picked up on me calling Alexa. Okay.
I'm not quite sure how to help you with that.
Okay, sorry. So this is a case in point that the technology is not there yet in terms of its ability to collaborate effectively. And that's the case for English. So when you talk about Urdu, which is a low resource language by definition, and when we say low resource, by the way, it doesn't mean that there is, in terms of number of speakers, it's actually in terms of number of digitized data that's available for that language. And so this is an amazing opportunity for people in Pakistan to actually, it doesn't take much to become a specialist in computational linguistics. You just need a laptop and access to compute power, and you're good to go, and just online courses and so on. But that's a tangent. To address your question related to chatbots, it's in the near future, I believe, that we're going to arrive at that sweet spot where we can have collaborative, human-like interactions with a system. And we have the challenge that's called the Turing challenge, where systems are currently even beating humans at this challenge of, faking that the systems are more like humans rather than systems. So I hope I've addressed your question.
All right, thank you for that. I'm going to ask you another question she has sent me. Firstly, thank you, Charisma. I'm going to say her name out because she has like a lot of questions. So I'm going to take two questions from her. So the second question is, it seems as if online subcultures have accelerated the process of language change. How much do you think internet language has affected our language in real life?
That's an excellent question. So the field is called diachronic linguistics, which is basically language change. And we've noticed that I'm not a sociolinguist, so people who work in this area are called sociolinguists, but I collaborate with sociolinguists and I look specifically at phenomena like code switching, where people mix languages. But back to social media and how it expedited language changes in semantics and drifts happen even more faster nowadays due to social media and the increase. It's not really the social media per se. Social media serves as a platform that enabled more communication, and more communication means more globalization. And then you end up getting a lot of sort of languages intermixing and borrowings happening rampantly, pervasively, more than it was before because of the language contact. So this enabled more language contact. And within a certain language, we also notice a lot more, you get the popularization of certain lingo that was less able to spread earlier when the media were not as facilitating as it is today. So social media has definitely expedited language change and language semantic drifts and shifts that we see, whether it's due to language contact, whether it's due to the enabling technology that allows for more communication, even within a specific culture.
All right, thank you for that. I'm going to ask another question. I'm not sure if it's related to this, but I wanted to just ask. Right now, like most of us do talk in a lot of emojis. So, is the future based like the language that we're going through? Is it like we're going back to going back to hieroglyphics? How the Egyptian civilization used to be? A lot of emojis that we use. So, what is the future of that? Like, how is that going to develop?
So I won't pretend that I have an answer to that question, but we definitely see a lot more emojis used. So a picture is worth 1,000 words, as we say, right? So there's a lot of work that we're doing now, what we call multimodal work, where we're looking at these kinds of emojis together with language, especially in this arena of emotion detection that I had mentioned that I'm working on. So we look at emojis, and they give us a lot of signals. They also reflect the level of formality of the text. So they have a lot of sociopragmatic connotations. So essentially, are we going in the direction of less and less words, more and more emojis, potentially? I mean, it's really interesting how we write SMSs in shorthand and how we write on social media in shorthand. So there is definitely a big space that is untapped. Are we going to give up language altogether? I don't think so. I mean, we're speaking animals, so I would imagine that we're going to have some kind of hybrid of these things. But on the processing side, though, we are definitely looking at these signals together with image processing, looking at these different modalities, essentially video, speech, images, text, and so on, depending on what you're trying to address. Say if you're trying to do dubbing or trying to do translation of movies and so on. So this is, or like think about AR, VR, like augmented reality or virtual reality that involve multiple modalities at the same time. So yes, absolutely. There is a big space for emojis and so on, but is it going to replace language? I don't know. I don't think so, actually, but yeah.
All right, so now we're going to move on to another segment, which I like to call heart to heart. But most of the questions you've already addressed in your presentation. So I'm just going to move on to the silly questions that I have for you. So are you ready for those?
Sure. There's no such thing as a silly question, by the way.
All right. So the question number one: if you had a superpower, what would it be and why?
If I had a superpower, wisdom is like basically be able to reflect deeply on my past so I can make better informed decisions. So I'd love to be wiser.
All Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Like from the Greek gods, Athena, who had the
Yeah,
wisdom. So
kind
you want
of.
to be like her, sort of.
Yeah, exactly.
All
And
right.
of course,
Question
be
number two.
gorgeous. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. You are already really pretty, mashallah. So
Oh,
yeah.
thank you.
So that's definitely checked. All right. So question number two. If you were to design a artificial intelligence gadget, what would it be?
Hmm. So my dream is to build systems that could actually reflect human reflect people's opinions in real time, and to be able to engage with people in a seamless manner. So that would be my like build some kind of an avatar that's really like very human like, that's very much interactive, reflecting, you know, views of people in real time, as opposed to the kind of biased media that we end up getting in this day and age. So I'd love to have sort of like an objective interlocutor. That's basically what I would love to have. And in fact, I would call that person or that avatar Roa, or perspectives. And it would reflect the perspectives of, young, old, middle aged, engineers, doctors, workers, service people. It would reflect certain different languages, different ethnicities, and so on. And be able to give us true, honest to God information, so that we can build better societies based on real information that's correct, that's honest. So that would be my dream.
Wow, that is just so interesting and very, very fascinating and like really world peace sort of a gadget. I hope we can see that soon or it happens because it is something that we truly need. Actually, we do. All right. So question number three. Mostly we see a lot of movies in which they show how the artificial intelligence is taking over the world. They're overthrowing humans. So is there any reality to all that science fiction in the near future with the advancements we're having in AI?
I don't believe so. So it's like maybe I'm too old. And I mean, I watch these movies and I'm like, wow, we can do that. No, we don't. It's still at infancy. But even when we reach maturity level, unless we're able to really, really model cognition and model consciousness, which I think are elusive, we don't even have any definitions for them. This is a trait of humanity that I don't think we are able to mimic. We could mimic some behaviors that look like we have some level of consciousness, some level of awareness, but in reality, I think the human touch is crucial, and the human angle is extremely important. We're going to build better collaborative systems, I believe, yes, that would make our lives much, much better. But are they going to replace us the way that we see in movies? I highly doubt it. And I hope I'm correct, and I hope the movies are wrong. So I'm still a believer in humanity. So that's part of the reason. I just didn't say this actually. So you notice I've used the word natural language processing and I've used the word computational linguistics. So there's sort of like two trends in our field. Natural language processing tends to appeal more to the engineering angle. So computer scientists tend to call themselves tend to call themselves natural language processing people, while computational linguists are people who care more about the language and the human mind. They care about cognitive science, cognition. But we use the same exact techniques. So the field is sort of like converging on both paradigms coming together. And I happen to believe more in the second paradigm. I'm really fascinated by the human mind, and I'm using natural language processing and artificial intelligence as a way of trying to understand how we think about things, to give us more insight. And I believe in this as a synergistic relationship. So there's some level of symbiosis between the two paradigms of computer science and cognition and the human mind. So yeah, back to your question. I doubt it. Maybe collaborative, better life, yes.
All right, thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for taking out the time. I don't feel like wrapping up, but I think we've actually it's going to be an hour session, which was supposed to be a 45-minute session. It's now an hour session. So thank you so much, Dr. Mona, for taking the time and for sharing such amazing and fascinating field with us. Because I think a lot of us didn't know much about it, except for like some of the linguists who were actually present in the session with us today. But besides that, it was really, really interesting. And honestly, I have no words except for this is all I have left. To be honest.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. It was really an honor and a privilege to be here with you today. And this is a new audience for me, so I'm extremely excited about addressing people in Pakistan. It's definitely on my bucket list. So I'd love to come visit someday. So hopefully after this whole COVID thing's over. I really appreciate it.
Yes, definitely. And the Khwarizmi Science Society would love to host you. Definitely. Just let us know when you're coming and we will host you for sure.
Inshallah.
Thank you once
Inshallah.
again. Yeah, inshallah. But this one actually means we'll do it. Bye.
Assalamu alaikum. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the audience for joining us. Take care of yourself, and inshallah we'll be back with another amazing Muslim woman in science. So till then, Allah Hafiz.